In 1983, a minivan rolled off the line at a Chrysler plant in Belvidere, Illinois, and it pulled the entire company back from the edge of bankruptcy. It was a Plymouth, the Plymouth Voyager, the first minivan anyone had ever built. It hauled a generation of American kids to school, and it saved Chrysler from going under. 16 years later, the company killed the brand that built it. Not the minivan, the whole brand. Plymouth, gone. There was no bankruptcy this time. There was no bailout. Chrysler was making money. It simply decided it did not need Plymouth anymore. This was a 72-year-old American brand, created by Walter Chrysler in 1928 to be the cheap car a working man could afford. It carried the whole company through the Great Depression and saved it again in the 1980s. So why would anyone kill the brand that saved the company twice? Stay to the end, and you will understand exactly why. Because the men who made that decision were not in Detroit. They were in Stuttgart, Germany. If you are watching this on your phone right now, tap the like button on the screen. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm that stories like this one deserve to be told. To understand why a German company would kill Plymouth, you have to understand why an American one built it, and what it was built to survive. In the middle of the 1920s, Walter Chrysler had a problem. His company sold Chryslers, which were good cars and expensive ones, but the money in the American car market was down at the bottom, where Ford and Chevrolet sold to everyone else. Chrysler had nothing to sell the working man. So, on the 7th of July, 1928, he introduced one. He called it the Plymouth, after the rock the Pilgrims landed on, a name that sounded solid and American and permanent. It was cheap, but it gave you more than cheap. Hydraulic brakes on all four wheels when the competition still used cables. Within 6 years, Plymouth had built 1 million cars and climbed to third place in America, behind only Ford and Chevrolet. Then the Great Depression came, and it should have killed the whole company. It did not, because of Plymouth. The cheap car everyone could still almost afford carried the entire corporation through the worst decade American industry ever had. Chrysler survived the Depression on the back of Plymouth. That is not an exaggeration. That is the arithmetic. But notice one thing, because it matters later. From the beginning, almost every Plymouth dealer also sold Chryslers. For 70 years, that was a strength. At the end, it would be the reason Plymouth was the easiest thing in the building to kill. On the 1st of April, 1964, Plymouth put a car on sale that beat the Ford Mustang to market by 16 days. It was called the Barracuda, a fastback with the largest piece of curved glass ever fitted to a production car up to that point. By the calendar, it was the first pony car. Ford unveiled the Mustang 16 days later, and history handed Ford the credit. But Plymouth got there first. That was the decade Plymouth stopped being just the cheap car and became something a young man wanted. The Roadrunner, named for the cartoon, with the horn that went beep beep. The Superbird, with a nose cone and a wing so tall you could see it over a parking lot. Built so Plymouth could go stock car racing. It brought Richard Petty back. On a Sunday in 1970, if you were a boy at a NASCAR fence, the winged car coming down the front straight was a Plymouth. If your father brought home a Roadrunner, you remember the sound of the engine before you remember the color of the car. And it sold. In the 1973 model year, by the figures in the Ward's Automotive Yearbook, Plymouth built 882,000 cars, the highest volume in the brand's history. It would never come close again across the 29 years it had left. The cars that carried that record came out of a plant on West Chrysler Drive in Belvidere, Illinois, opened in 1965. The very first vehicle down that line was a Plymouth Fury. Stand inside that building on a weekday morning in the mid-1970s. The paint line reaches you first, fresh lacquer curing under the infrared lamps, and under it the chemical sting of cutting oil. Then the sound, the percussion of the stamping presses, the pneumatic stutter of impact wrenches down the line. A body shell swinging past on the overhead conveyor, and another behind it. As many as 5,000 people worked in that plant, most of them United Auto workers living within an easy drive of the gate. Then, in 1983, Plymouth did something no one had ever done. It built a minivan. The Voyager was not fast, and it was not beautiful. It was a box with a sliding door and a low floor a child could climb into, and it fit in an ordinary garage. Nobody had made anything quite like it. America bought it by the hundreds of thousands. It hauled a generation of kids to school and to baseball practice, and it pulled Chrysler back from the edge of collapse a second time. If you learned to drive in the 1980s, there is a good chance the first vehicle you ever backed out of a driveway was a Voyager. That was the promise Plymouth kept for 55 years. The car a working family could afford, that did exactly what a working family needed. It only worked as long as Plymouth was building something no one else was. One decision changed everything, and to see it, you have to walk back into a Plymouth showroom at the end of the 1990s and count the cars. The Voyager was a Dodge Caravan with a Plymouth badge. The Neon was a Dodge Neon. The Breeze was a Dodge Stratus with the corners rounded off. Every single Plymouth on that floor was a Dodge or a Chrysler wearing a different name. The brand that had once built the first minivan, the first pony car, the winged car that won at NASCAR, now built nothing of its own at all. That Erosion had a name inside the industry: badge engineering. It had crept in since the 1970s, a little more every year, because unique sheet metal costs money, and sharing it saves money. By the end, Plymouth had been hollowed out until nothing was left that was only a Plymouth. And then, right at the end, Plymouth was handed one last car that was genuinely its own. It was a retro design, a rounded shape that looked like a 1930s gangster car shrunk down and modernized, and it had started life as a Plymouth concept called the Pronto. The public loved it. It was the most distinctive thing Chrysler had shown in years, and when it reached production, it wore a Chrysler badge, not a Plymouth one. It became the Chrysler PT Cruiser. The single most Plymouth thing to come out of the company in a decade was taken away from Plymouth on its way to the showroom, and then the company turned around and said Plymouth had no products of its own worth keeping. Here is how that happened. In 1998, Daimler-Benz, the German company that built Mercedes, merged with Chrysler in a deal both sides called a merger of equals. It was not a merger of equals. Within 2 years, the American executives were gone and the company was run from Germany, and the Germans looked at what they had bought and saw 3 brands, Chrysler, Dodge, and Plymouth, selling the same cars to the same people. They only needed 2 of them. The man who delivered the news was James Holden, the president of the Chrysler side of the new company, an executive who had come up through sales and marketing and who genuinely seemed to feel the weight of what he was announcing. On the 3rd of November, 1999, he stood up and said Plymouth would be phased out. He called it an emotional decision. He said Plymouth would always be an important part of the company's heritage. And then he ended it. The reason it was Plymouth and not Dodge comes back to that showroom floor from 70 years earlier. Every Plymouth dealer also sold Chrysler. Kill Plymouth, and the dealer barely felt it, because he was still selling Chryslers on the same lot. But many Dodge dealers sold only Dodge. Kill Dodge, and you would wreck an entire dealer network overnight. Dodge also still had a real identity: trucks and muscle and the Viper, the things Plymouth used to have and had lost. So Dodge lived. Plymouth was simply the easiest thing in the building to cut. The brand that saved the company twice died because killing it hurt the least. The last Plymouth was built at Belvidere on the 28th of June, 2001, a silver neon. Fittingly, it was not sold to a family. It went to a company executive for his private collection. And here's the part I keep coming back to. The spreadsheet was not wrong. Plymouth had under 2% of the market. More than half the people shopping a Plymouth were already looking at a Dodge or a Chrysler in the same visit. On paper, Plymouth was a rounding error the company was paying twice to keep. The math was right about everything except what a Plymouth had once meant to the man who could finally afford one. The Plymouth you can still feel today is not on a showroom floor. It is at an auction. In January of 2026, in Kissimmee, Florida, a 1971 Plymouth Cuda convertible sold for $3.3 million. That car cost about $4,500 new. The cheap car for the working man had become one of the most valuable automobiles on Earth, and the brand that built it had been dead for 25 years. Go looking online today, and you will find video after video promising a new Plymouth Barracuda coming back. None of them are real. They are pictures generated by a machine to sell clicks. But think about what it means that they work. 25 years on, the hunger for this brand is still strong enough that people make a living faking cars that do not exist. So there is the answer to the question we started with. Plymouth was not killed because it failed. It did exactly what it was built to do, right to the end. It died because it had been made identical to the cars beside it, and because every dealer who sold it also sold something else. It did not die of weakness. It died of being the easiest cut on the page. Before we close, if this story found you, if you have been carrying a memory of one of these cars without quite knowing what to do with it, there are more stories like this one. Subscribe, and we will keep telling them. The first Plymouth ever built rolled out of Highland Park, Michigan in 1928. The last rolled out of Belvidere, Illinois, on a June morning in 2001. 72 years, almost to the week, from the first to the last. Stand outside the Belvidere plant. For years after Plymouth ended, that line kept running, building Dodges and then Jeeps, until the winter of 2023, when the company idled it and 1,350 people lost their jobs. Close your eyes, go back. Smell the lacquer curing under the infrared lamps, and the cutting oil under it. Hear the presses, the impact wrenches working down the line. See a Plymouth Fury come off that line in 1965, the first vehicle the plant ever built. See a silver neon come off the same line 36 years later, the last Plymouth anyone would make. Open your eyes. The line is quiet. The name is gone. Walter Chrysler built a brand to carry the working man through the hardest years America ever had. It did. And then the company that inherited it decided the working man was not worth a brand of his own.